Okay, is Joe going to say anything? She disappeared. No, okay. I will introduce myself. I'm Ralph Nelson. I'm dressed as my ancestor, Captain Joseph Cheeseman. Getting the roughness straightened out there. My ancestor was in the Battle of White Plains, and he later served as captain of masons building the forts at West Point. Is the microphone in the wrong place? Oh, okay. 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 Try not to breathe in it. My reading today is part one of a series of 13 broadsides written by Thomas Paine. I have over here a broadside, the one that I'm reading. That's the size that the broadside was when it was originally printed. You will notice the print on it is, first of all, rather small, and secondly, it looks kind of funny because it's the print of that time. And I'm sorry I did not bring a blow-up copy of that to show you what the print at that time was, but this was the good old days when S's looked like F's and that sort of thing. The other issue is it's the copy that the Library of Congress has. Why they have such a bad copy, I don't know, but that's what is there. The translation that I'm using, transliteration that I'm using, was done by the National Humanities Center and reads reasonably. Anyway, a broadside was a single piece of paper, and it contained about 4,000 words, suitable for posting on a wall or for reading at a public gathering. I'm going to skip the less interesting paragraphs because it would take too long to read the whole thing. And I would say do not worry if you can't read the words on the screen, because I'm going to be reading them as we go through the broadside. But first, we'll do a little bit of background for a listing of the events and the places in here. The American Crisis was, part one was published on December 19th, 1776. Declaration of Independence was only 6 months prior to that, and a number of things happened after that happened. So this broadside was printed early in the war. After the first battles at Lexington and Concord, which you may remember is west of Boston, about here-ish in Massachusetts, the Patriots captured Fort Ticonderoga, which you can see a little bit farther up in there. And they brought the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, which the British had occupied several years previously and before the war broke out. And they were driven out of Boston by the fact that there were cannon on the hills overlooking the town and could have destroyed their warships that were there. So blue is for a Patriot win up there. And these are just battles after the Declaration of Independence. So the British then brought a lot of warships and troops to Staten Island, which is off of Long Island, for those of you who are not familiar with the area. It's on the New Jersey side of New York. And with those troops, General Howe, whose name's up there, won the battles of Brooklyn, which is on Long Island, and also then came across and took New York and won at the Battle of White Plains, and pretty much dispersed the American troops from there, either north toward West Point or toward the west, where they still had a couple of forts. They then took Fort Lee, which wasn't very much of a fort, it was just an earthen fort, and the Patriots were outnumbered about 4-1 by the British troops, so they abandoned that without having any actual shooting. And then they drove the Patriots back through New Jersey following the line here, and they got as far back as pushing them across the Delaware River onto the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. And they then had the Hessians and so on occupy Trenton to hold it for the winter. Usually the troops did not fight during the wintertime. Well, the Patriot militia that were fighting for Washington, their commitments ended on December 31st. They had been sent down there by their states to fight under Washington's command, and they had a limited time. The contract was until December 31st, and since they'd been having a tough time, they were all looking forward to going home on December 31st. And if General Washington didn't win a battle very soon, it is unlikely that the states would have sent more troops for the next year, and the revolution would have been over. So Washington was in a tough place. Well, what might be done to boost the morale of the troops was the question at this point, with only a week left in their enlistments. Well, fortunately for Washington, an experienced and passionately anti-monarchy writer named Thomas Paine had joined the army in New York, and he wrote exactly what was needed for the situation. General Washington ordered that the broadside be published or printed up more copies of that and have it read to the various troops on a very cold winter day. I said it was December, it was the middle of winter, snow was on the ground, ice was in the Delaware River, and he needed to stiffen their resolve because he was planning on marching in the middle of the night to Trenton and surprising the Hessians who were in Trenton. Okay, so here's the broadside, and I will now read. Put the stand up. It's a wise man that knows what thing to turn. Oh, there we go. Now if you'll fetch back the clicker for me, we'll be all set. The electronics love me. Anyway, we will read in through this, and I will have some segments that are up on the screen. And the first one is up on the screen is part of the beginning sentence. These are the times that try men's souls. Try in the sense of test. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to set a proper price on its goods. It would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God. Whether the independence of this continent was declared too soon or delayed too long, I will not now enter into as an argument. My own simple opinion is that had it been 8 months earlier, it would have been much better. We did not make a proper use of last winter, neither could we, while we were in a dependent state. I'm going to take the hat off. However, the fault, if it were one, was all our own, so we have none to blame but ourselves. But no great deal is lost yet. All that General Howe has been doing for this month past is rather a ravage than a conquest, which the spirit of the Jerseys a year ago would have quickly repulsed, and which time and little resolution will soon recover. It's been about a month, and what was going on then was that Howe was having battles in New Jersey to secure that land and therefore secure supplies that he needed for food and fodder. I have as little superstition in me as any man living, but my secret opinion has ever been, and still is, that God Almighty will not give up a people to military destruction or leave them unsupported to perish if they have so earnestly and so repeatedly sought to avoid the calamities of war by every decent method which wisdom could invent. Neither have I so much of the unbeliever in me as to suppose that he has relinquished the government of the world and given us up to the care of devils. And as I do not, I cannot see what grounds the King of Britain can look up to heaven for help against us. A common murderer, a bandit, or a housebreaker has as good a pretense as he. I am well acquainted with many circumstances with which those who live at a distance know but little or nothing of. I was with the troops at Fort Lee and marched with them to the edge of Pennsylvania. Our situation at Fort Lee was exceedingly cramped, the place being a narrow neck of land between the North River and the Hackensack. Our force was inconsiderable, being not 1/4 so great as Howe could bring against us. We had no army at hand to relieve the garrison had we shut ourselves up and stood on our defense. The simple object was to bring off the garrison and march them on until they could be strengthened by the Jersey or Pennsylvania militia, so as to be enabled to make a stand. We stayed 4 days at Newark, collected our outposts with some of the Jersey militia, and marched out twice to meet the enemy. On information of their being advancing, though our numbers were greatly inferior to theirs. Why is it that the enemy hath left the New England provinces and made these middle ones the seat of war? The answer is easy. New England is not infested with Tories, and we are. I have been reluctant to raise my voice against these men, and I have used numberless arguments to show them their danger. But it will not do to sacrifice our cause to either their folly or their baseness. The period has now arrived when either they or we must change our sentiments, or one or both must fall. And what is a Tory? Good God, what is he? If the Tories attempted to form a militia, I should not be afraid to go with 100 patriots against 1,000 Tories. Every Tory is a coward, because servile, slavish, self-interested fear is the foundation of Toryism, and a man under such influence, though he may be cruel, can never be brave. I once felt all that kind of anger that a man ought to feel against the mean principles that are held by the Tories. A noted Tory, who kept a tavern at Amboy, was standing at his door with a pretty 8-year-old daughter. After complaining about the battles in New York, he finished with this unfatherly expression: "Well, give me peace in my day." Really, not a man living holds on this continent, but fully believes that a separation must sometime or other finally take place. And a generous parent should have said, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. And this single reflection, well applied, is sufficient to waken every man to duty. Not a place upon earth might be so happy as America. Her situation is remote from all the wrangling world, and she has nothing to do but trade with them. I am as confident as I am that God governs the world, that Americans will never be happy until she gets rid of foreign domination. Wars without ceasing will break out till that period arrives. America did not and does not want force, but she lacked a proper application of that force. Wisdom is not the purchase of a day, and it is no wonder that we should err at first setting off. From an excess of reluctance, we were unwilling to raise an army and trusted our cause to the temporary defense of a well-meaning militia. A summer's experience has now taught us better. Yet with those troops, while they were collected, we were able to set bounds on the progress of the enemy. And thank God they are again assembling. I always considered militia as the best troops in the world for a sudden exertion, but they will not do for a long campaign. Howe, it is probable, will make an attempt on this city, Philadelphia. If he succeeds, our cause is not ruined. He stakes all on his side against a part on ours. If he succeeds, the consequence will be that armies from both ends of this continent will march to assist their friends in the Middle States. For Howe cannot go everywhere. It is impossible. America could carry on a 2-year war by the confiscation of the property of disaffected persons, such as Tories, and be made happy by their expulsion. Say not that this is revenge. Call it rather soft resentment of a suffering people who, having no object in view but the good of all, have staked their own all upon a seemingly doubtful event. Somewhat elliptical prose. Okay. Quitting this class of men, I turn with a warm ardor of a friend to those who have nobly stood and are yet determined to stand the matter out. I call upon not a few, but upon all, not on this state or that state, but on every state. Rise up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel. Better to have too much force than too little when so great an object is at stake. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and to repulse it. Say not that thousands are gone. Turn out your tens of thousands. Throw not the burden of the day upon Providence, but show faith by your works that God may bless you. It matters not where you live or what rank of life you hold. The evil or the blessing will reach you all. The far and the near, the home counties and the back country, the rich and the poor will suffer or rejoice alike. The heart that feels not now is dead. The blood of his children will curse his cowardice who shrinks back at a time when a little might have saved the whole and made them happy. My own line of reasoning is to myself as straight and clear as a ray of light. Not all the treasures of the world, so far as I believe, could have induced me to support an offensive war. I think it murder. But if a thief break into my house to burn and destroy my property, and to kill or threaten to kill me and those that are in it, and to bind me in all cases whatsoever to his absolute will, am I to permit it? What signifies it to me whether he who does it is a king or a common man, my countryman or not my countryman, whether it be done by an individual villain or an army of them? If we reason to the root of things, we shall find no difference. Neither can any just cause be assigned why we should punish in the one case and pardon in the other. Let them call me rebel and welcome. I feel no concern from it, but I should suffer the misery of the devils were I to make a whore of my soul by swearing allegiance to one whose character is that of a sottish, stupid, stubborn, worthless, brutish man. I conceive it likewise a horrid idea to receive mercy from a being who, at the day of final judgment, shall be shrieking to the rocks and mountains to cover him and fleeing with terror from the orphan, the widow, and the slain of America. There are cases which cannot be overdone by language, and this is one. There are persons, too, who do not see the full extent of the evil which threatens them. They solace themselves with hopes that the enemy, if they succeed, will be merciful. It is the madness of folly to expect mercy from those who have refused to do justice. And even mercy, where conquest is the object, is only a trick of war. The cunning of the fox is as murderous as the violence of the wolf, and we ought to guard equally against both. Howe's first object is, partly by threats and partly by promises, to terrify or seduce the people to deliver up their arms and to receive mercy. The British cabinet recommended the same plan to General Gage, and this is what the Tories call making their peace, a peace which passes all understanding. Indeed, that peace would be an immediate forerunner of a worse ruin than any we have yet thought of. Ye men of Pennsylvania, do reason upon these things. Were the western counties to give up their arms, they would fall an easy prey to the Indians, who are all armed. This is perhaps what some Tories would not be sorry for. They would be exposed to the resentment, missed a sentence. Were the eastern counties to deliver up their arms, they would be exposed to the resentment of the western counties, who would then have it in their power to chastise their defection at pleasure. And were any one state to give up its arms, that state must be garrisoned by all Howe's army of Britons and Hessians to preserve it from the anger of the rest. Mutual fear is the principal link in the chain of mutual love, and woe be it to that state that breaks the compact. Howe is mercifully inviting you to barbarous destruction, and men must either be rogues or fools that will not see it. I dwell not upon the vapors of imagination. I bring reason to your ears, and the language is as plain as A, B, C, to hold up truth to your eyes. I thank God that I fear not. I see no real cause for fear. I know our situation well, and I can see the way out of it. While our army was collected, Howe dared not risk a battle, and it is no credit to him that he decamped from the White Plains and waited a mean opportunity to ravage the defenseless Jerseys. But it is great credit to us. With a handful of men, we sustained an orderly retreat for near 100 miles, brought off our ammunition, all our artillery, the greatest part of our stores, and had 4 rivers to pass. None can say our retreat was precipitate, for we were near 3 weeks in performing it, that the country might have time to send reinforcements. Twice we marched back to meet the enemy and remained out until dark. The sign of fear was not seen in our camp, and had not some of the cowardly and disaffected Tories spread false alarms throughout the country, the Jerseys would never have been ravaged. Once more, our new army is recruiting fast, and we shall be able to open the next campaign with 60,000 men, well armed and clothed. This is our situation, and anyone who will may know it. By perseverance and fortitude, we shall have the prospect of a glorious outcome. By cowardice and submission, we shall have the sad choice of a variety of evils: a ravaged country, a depopulated city, habitations without safety, and slavery without hope. Our homes will be turned into barracks and bawdy houses for Hessians, and a future generation to provide for, whose fathers we shall doubt of. Look on this picture and weep over it. And if there yet remain one thoughtless wretch who believes it not, let him suffer it unlamented. That ends the broadside. It was signed Common Sense. It was not signed Thomas Paine, because everybody knew that Common Sense was written by Thomas Paine. And it was dated December 23rd, 1776. So I will now go on and say a little bit more, brief. Thus inspired, Washington's troops boarded boats that night, crossed the ice-choked Delaware River, and I should say that 2 of the other of the 3 arms that were supposed to cross the river and reach Trenton, the other 2 didn't make it across the river because it had too much ice on it. So only Washington's group made it across. They marched 9 miles, they surprised the sleeping Hessians, and they won the Battle of Trenton. 2 days later, they savaged British forces at the Battle of Princeton, so the revolution was not extinguished. And independence was achieved 7 years later in 1783. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. Do we have any questions? Oh, I have one more slide which says questions. Thank you. Well, this was read to them so that they didn't, yeah. Well, the literacy rate was always greater in the United States than it was in England, because in England there was not much interest in teaching people, whereas over here in New England, it was very important for the people in the church up there to be able to read the Bible. And so they had schools up in the north that taught pretty much everybody to read. In the south, the situation is a little bit different, but in terms of the specific question of what fraction of the troops that he had, I don't know. Yeah. Yes, he did. Yeah, as I say, I haven't seen anything suggesting what the percent was, but the broadside, the pamphlet that Thomas Paine had printed several years previous, about a year and a half previously, called Common Sense, the 47-page pamphlet, it sold 150,000 copies in the United States, and the population at that point was 3 million maybe total. And obviously, the pamphlet got passed around somewhat. Not everybody had enough money to buy it and so on. So kind of hard to judge from that. No, I think that was the next year. That's a good point. That's something I should know. I don't. It was. Yeah, but don't think I went up there because Valley Forge was up on. Oh, that's right. It would have been that. Yeah, it could have been that winter. Right. Yeah, right. They drove the British out of Philadelphia later that year. Yeah. Okay, we don't have any true historians here that know the answer to that question. Apologize for that. Anybody else? I'd make comment I forgot to say at the beginning, the uniform made by my wife, which is sort of traditional. My mother made similar, exactly the same uniform actually for my father for the bicentennial back in 1976. And it was fairly common for somebody in the family to put together a uniform for the person that was in the Army. That's right, and I was going to say that at the beginning too, and I said we've got to limit time here. The Continental Army was not formed until 1777. So there was no Continental Army in 1776. So this is a little bit out of date. But my ancestor joined in 1776. So, but he was at West Point. He was not when the Battle of White Plains was lost by the Americans. The troops that were in that battle, by and large, fled north and gathered up in the Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh, right? No, one Newburgh. Okay, you go up the river from New York and you come to Albany in the Peekskill. I'll get to the end. It begins with the P, Peekskill. In the Peekskill area of New York, and they defended the river crossing up in that area so that there could still be a communication in terms of arms and money and food from New England to the rest of the country. And a great part of the war was spent by the British trying to cut the country, not in half, but down the river to cut off the New England colonies, which were the ones that had the highest percentage of people who didn't like England from the rest of the world. Later on in the war, they thought maybe they had a better chance to go south, and so they made a big attempt to attack through Charleston, South Carolina, and they had considerable success there, but it was really too far from their supply of fresh troops, and they finally gave up that and went to Yorktown, and the French came in to help us, and the war was over. Quick history of the war. Yeah. Right. At that time, there were a number of colonies that Britain had. One of them was Canada, and there were they had others like Bermuda and a couple of islands in the Caribbean and so on. And so, and of course, America referred to both continents, so it was really North America. We enjoy calling it ourselves Americans and so on. The Mexicans get a little annoyed at us, but it's somewhat of a misnomer. But the United States is kind of a long thing to say. So, but it's interesting, the buttons that I have on my hat, I guess it is, says USA on it. So they were casting things at the time that says it was the United States of America. And certainly they were attempting to bring Canada into this. And one of the first things they did was to send a group up to Canada to see if they could get the Canadians to join in the revolt. And unfortunately, a lot of the Canadians were Catholics that were French, because Canada, of course, had started out French and had only recently been gotten from them. And the French weren't really sure whether a different group of British would be better than the old group of British. So that particular attempt failed. Florida was also a colony of Britain. They had East Florida and West Florida, and they had gotten those recently from Spain. And again, the people, that was fairly sparsely settled down there. And that, although several attempts were made by the Georgia troops to go down there and capture Jacksonville area, they failed. And so we didn't get those. So first of all, there were other colonies beyond the 13 that ended up revolting. Another of the interesting things is that Delaware wasn't a colony until about 2 days before the war started, so to speak. That they had been part of the Pennsylvania colony, although they had had separate governments for local affairs. And New Hampshire, no, Vermont wasn't a colony. It was an area that was in dispute between New Hampshire and New York. So the Green Mountain Boys were kind of in between, you might say, the two. So the 13 original states don't include Vermont. But they do include Delaware. It's all crazy. It's real history. Anyway, well, I thank you for coming, and look forward to getting out of my uniform on this day. Hope you have a pleasant dinner. Yes, I'm sure there are. There are a large number of battles from the Revolutionary War that were fought down here in around 1780 and so on. And we have large numbers of people down here who participate in activities there. And I'm sure they include reenactments. One of the things that has complicated matters in recent years is that the Park Service has become unhappy with people having firearms on the national parks, and so they've sort of banned reenactments in the national parks. But they often have them next to the national park, you know, so they'll rent somebody's farm and do it. Yeah. I know there are commemorations. I'm in the North Carolina part of the Sons of the American Revolution, and they have commemorations at about 15, 16 different areas here. They're not reenactments in the sense of going out in the field and pointing guns and bayonets at each other, but they have a commemorative service and lay wreaths and this sort of thing. Okay. Now I'll take leave that there. Put these over here.